Hey everyone, welcome to another G News update. Well, we've just heard Emmanuel Macron deliver his speech at the United Nations General Assembly at a special conference that has been facilitated by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and France. And Emmanuel Macron has really emphasized that the time is now. It's not a time for waiting. The time is now. Now is the time to recognize the people of Palestine and to accord them the rights of statehood in order to facilitate a two-state solution. And Emmanuel Macron received a standing ovation for bringing our attention to the time and the essence of time and how the time is no more time for delays or sitting around waiting or getting back to somebody or finding out more facts or dithering around, because it's been nearly 80 years ever since the United Nations has been formed, that we've had plenty of time to gather facts, and we have almost run out of time. So delaying and waiting and saying it's not a race, that's just not going to cut it for anybody that's got a conscience, anyone that cares about human life, anyone that really wants to do something to help people who are in a terrible, genocidal situation. And also those people that are rotting in Israeli prisons, the 11,000 people that have been abducted and taken without real justification and put into prisons, and the 48 remaining hostages that have been taken by Hamas in a terrorist act, but that nothing, I think, justifies genocide. Not these hostages, no, nothing. So Israel and the people that support Israel need to stop, and we need the world to come in. And I think this is what Emmanuel Macron was saying, along with many, many other, the majority of the world is saying, this has got to stop. This conflict's been going on since the birth of the United Nations, and now it's on us. We are responsible. The time is now, not Friday, not Saturday, not next week, not when Christopher Luxon decides to come out from behind the couch making TikTok videos instead of pitching up like a real leader at the United Nations. Like most other countries, their presidents and prime ministers are there, but Christopher Luxon's nowhere to be found. And Winston Peters is making excuses for him, saying, well, there's a few leaders that aren't here, but they had good reason not to be, whereas Christopher Luxon's got no good reason, has he? Absolutely no good reason at all. And he's making bogus videos that say the plan is working economically, and that we're starting to deliver, and that there's this bit and that bit of New Zealand that's, still okay and going well, when the vast majority of it's gone backwards, and everyone's sick and tired of listening to the spin that doesn't add up. But when it comes to Palestine, there was also some very inspiring words from Emmanuel Macron, in my opinion. He talked about some, action on the ground and what would actually happen if everyone resolved to recognize the state of Palestine now. And he was talking about all the other countries, not just the UK and Canada and Australia, that coming forward and recognizing Palestine today, right now, but also Spain and a few other countries, and the list went on and on for a while. But New Zealand's name wasn't there, and I felt a profound level of disgust and disappointment that our government doesn't represent us. And I think this is akin to the past, where the government gets out of step with the whole population, or nearly most of the population anyway. And we have incidents in the past, where there were people that had conscience, and you look back and you go, well, yeah, I was a protester against the Springbok tour in the 1981, but you don't hear from people that were all for rugby, and you don't hear much about that now, because people have realised that apartheid is a great evil, and the people in Palestine are basically living in an open-air prison, have done so now since about 2009. So it's not normal there. It's not like normal conditions, where you run elections and everything's just fine. You're actually constantly being subverted. Everyone's living in trauma and fear. Many families have lost people. There's all sorts of intergenerational trauma that's inflicted everybody. And so to sort of think of it as if it's kind of like in our shoes is just wrong, and sort of judging Palestinian people by those standards is wrong. Also, while I do not in any way endorse any kind of terrorism or what happened on the 7th of October, I'd just like to add that, there's these old statements around that sort of say one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. So if you were colonized and you were occupied and you were put into a prison and your family were killed, would you fight back? Would you defend yourself physically? Would you say, well, it's my Second Amendment right to defend myself against an aggressive occupier and invader? So New Zealanders, really need to wake up to what the reality of being a human in those kind of conditions really are. So when we're talking about Hamas handing over the 48 hostages, yes, we're horrified. It's terribly bad. Terrorism is wrong. But also we see terrorism from the state of Israel when it's going after babies and children and starving people, and famine is declared, and genocide. There's a couple of things there. There's a plausible risk of genocide that has been determined by the International Court of Justice. And there's also a call from the UN Commission saying, well, this is genocide on 4 of the 5 measures from the Genocide Convention from 1948, and there's evidence of that in a 78-page report that very few people who have a strong opinion about this have actually read in its entirety, nor have they bothered to listen to the chair of the UN Commission. And I believe Christopher Luxon just arbitrarily dismissed the whole thing, waiting for some kind of after the genocide legal determination. So they didn't have to act on anything. It was very inhumane, and seems very, very comfortable with other people dying every day, children being starved to death, people being shot in the head and targeted, journalists being targeted because they're journalists. And Christopher Luxon wants to wait. It's not a race, he says. Come on, there's nothing really too serious going on here for Christopher Luxon. At the same time as Emmanuel Macron was recognising the state of Israel, Palestine, he was saying that what needs to happen now are, things like a force of people from all over the world to come into Gaza and to protect the people of Gaza, and to start to pour money in there and donate to rebuilding the society there, to strengthen everything, to do a peaceful handover with Hamas to a different government there. And it all seemed to make so much sense. And at the end of his speech, which was really focused on time, Emmanuel Macron said, the time is now. While New Zealand is still waiting around, of course, because it's not a race, but the time is now, is what he said to Winston Peters, and Winston Peters just blew this off, basically, in front of the press. Winston Peters couldn't be bothered actually sitting there for the 3 hours of the summit. He'd gone all the way there, but it was 2 hours in, and he basically went, I'll just go and talk to the press. So off he went, leaving it, and the press asked him, why did you do that? And he said, because you people asked me to come to a press conference. So here I am. Anyway, Winston basically said that the decision that had, in principle, been made by Cabinet would be ratified, if you like, on Thursday US time, which is Friday our time. So I guess Cabinet will know what they're doing on Friday, and we'll hear about it on Saturday in the speech. It was put to Winston at the time that, Anthony Albanese had actually made the comment that Australia's foreign policy on Palestine isn't made in New York, and it's not made in Wellington. So media were interested to know whether there'd been some influence from Wellington towards Australia. But of course, Winston wasn't going to be open and honest with anybody, so he brushed that all off. And, the other news concerning Winston was really just those pathways to residence visas. If you've been here for 3 years from a different country and you work in hospo and the employer has trained you and they want to keep you, well, this is about employers going to the government and saying, look, make it easier for us to keep the people we've trained that have come here. And Winston's against that. He doesn't want that to happen for employers and businesses, and he wants to revert to something a little bit more that plays on the prejudices of people who just want to sort of fall back on training our own people first, and not having people coming in and filling the shoes in restaurants and in orchards and stuff where we pick fruit and stuff. Well, that we don't want to do these kind of jobs, but the most skilled people come in from places like Europe and follow the sun around the world. So we didn't want those people to get those visas and residency, pathways to residency. So that was in the news this morning concerning Winston. But these bigger topics around Palestine, well done, Emmanuel Macron. We also saw, leaders like the president of South Africa speaking. We saw the president of Senegal. We heard that Spain is going to recognise Palestine soon. We heard a list of other countries are also going to follow suit. And there's a big international effort to recognise them now so that this genocide can be stopped, that people can go in there. A kind of a combined force, a military force, can come down into the ground and protect people, get them the food, get them the medical attention that they need. And so this horrifying, terrible, inhumane situation that is supported by only a few governments and seemingly, the kind of wipe your hands and wait around type governments like New Zealand. Now, we're standing on the wrong side of history and we're not acting today. So that's basically sort of what I just saw happen at the United Nations this morning. In other news, we've got about 5,500 senior doctors going on strike because, as Carmel pointed out on TVNZ Breakfast this morning, Christopher Luxon's government prioritised their donors and prioritised property speculators and landlords and gave them huge amounts of money that we needed to borrow for. And then after they had done that to win power, they started to change their tune and talk about how you can't borrow off our balance sheet because debt. So they served themselves first and they prioritised all this and made those choices. And what they basically did is choose to underfund health. Now, I'd just like to break down 2 or 3 myths from Christopher Luxon and keep this pretty short. But one of them is that we're spending a record amount on health. You'll hear that said around the traps, that we always spend a bit more each time there's a budget. We never really go backwards and spend less. So that's one argument. But the better argument that you may not have heard yet is that in the data, you can see when we compare our health spend to GDP percentages that they've gone up, but they've actually completely come down under the national government. The spending on health to GDP ratio is crashing through the floor. It's going down, down, down. And that's a true kind of indication because it really talks about sort of more like the population growth, and the trends and the demands and things like that there are on the health services. When it comes to our gross domestic product, our means to tax people and to fund. So we know from studies from the doctors that since 2013 we've been underfunding by about $1 billion a year the resources, and so the doctors, when they want to be heard and they need more resources, they're not getting enough. It's insufficient. So the word is insufficient and the other word is inadequate, and really it's just not good enough from Christopher Luxon to use a device, a defence really, that says, I'm not listening to any of you because we've spent a record amount on health, $17 billion, and we heard that yesterday. So that's the first bogus spin that we're just sick and tired of hearing. I've heard it about 400 times now from Christopher Luxon to deflect the true and legitimate concerns of health professionals and people in the opposition who are hearing the evidence and know these other statistics. This way that Christopher Luxon's going is resulting in the death of people in corridors and out in car parks and places because they can't get into ED. And he says that he's concerned, but he's not really. This is sort of like just lip service, because really he hasn't spent enough, and he's defending and doubling down on an inadequate funding of the health sector, which I think, is basically all about that North Star of bringing our debt down. And it's all in the context of having spent so much on landlords, giving tax breaks to big tobacco. And Carmel was great, wasn't she, the way that she pointed that context out and basically said, look, when it comes to what Labor would do, it wouldn't do those things. It would spend more on health. It would invest more. It would bridge the gaps. It would listen to these doctors. It would pay them something that was not a real terms pay cut. It wouldn't double down like Simeon Brown. You know, it wouldn't be doing this 10-year contracting to private health providers and then hiding the actual costs from the public, you know, like the deception and the deceit and the lack of trust. And yet some people here still vote for National. They just love, I don't know what they like, but maybe they're masochists, but they love being sort of hoodwinked and, you know, fooled by all this business. Anyway, but just keep this fairly short. There's also that comment that Christopher Luxon made yesterday that we're a small nation, therefore we get tossed around. We're buffeted in the big waves. But any analysis of the size of nations and the size of their populations would show that there's no correlation between the impact of Trump tariffs and the psyche of those small nations because they're small. It's not like all of these small nations are being, you know, thrown into negative GDP growth. You know, you've just got to look at a couple of examples, you know, Denmark, you know, just name a few, you know, like that, Ireland. They might have taken a small hit, but they haven't taken the kind of hit New Zealand has. There's a disproportionate hit here. We've also got the fact that, so that whole thing about a small nation, that's pretty tenuous stuff, and it's the kind of vagueness that we're hearing from the National Party now as it scrambles to try and sort of like throw a blanket over the reality and doesn't want to get down into the facts. You know, what's really happening in all those sectors, and RNZ was quite good this morning because it detailed what's really happened in the last 2 years to the economy, and it's pretty bad reading when it comes to all of the different sectors, manufacturing, how that's fallen away, construction, you know, it's gone massive decrease into the negative territories now, you know, losing all those jobs. The data at the moment that's around when it comes to GDP is bad, and you've got Luxon using superlatives, and I suppose another highlight I'd like to make is the tendency for Luxon to grab a very small part of a very big bad picture, the small part being the only positive parts, and then saying, look at that bit there. He does this when it comes to the police as well. You know, you can have really bad crime statistics going on, and then he'll just pick some part, like, say, the CBD in Auckland, where, you know, if you shuffle the deck chairs and you bring in people from the outer suburbs in the police force and pour them into Auckland and then have a conference in the CBD and focus only on the CBD and say we're successful and ignore the rest of the country, well, this is the kind of tactics that are being used to pull the wool, you know, and we're seeing it with the economy. Look at the East Coast, he'll say, and he'll point out a couple of other areas. Look at agriculture, it's really a two-speed economy, you know, and I understand that the cities, blah, blah, blah. Another area, I think, which is bogus is his talk and spin about 40% of mortgage holders are still to refix. So the problem here is that 60% already have, and what have they done? Well, they haven't spent their money. There's a liquidity problem in the New Zealand economy, and that has to do with the people that have got all the money who have actually already fixed and refixed their mortgages. They're not spending it at restaurants. The volume of retail sales is actually down. So what we're seeing is people from the bank data, Bernard Hickey showed this data this morning, bank deposits are up, savings are up, people are holding their money in the bank. And that's been the case pretty much through this government. So when Christopher Luxon says, hey, the good news is that 40% will refix soon, that again is about what happens to the money, say if it's $300 a week or a fortnight that is now available to people. Do they continue to do what they've already been doing, which is just to save it or to pay down their mortgages? Probably. There's no evidence from Christopher Luxon that that behaviour will change. And the vast majority of people that would have been spending this money now no longer have that discretionary money because the inflation and the cost of living has caught up with them, and that gap between what they could afford to spend on things and what they now need to just pay their bills has got so narrow that you know, there's no spending going on. So we've got stagflation at the same time that inflation is continuing to slowly go up. So these are reasons, there's three of them, that Christopher Luxon's spin is flaky and surface level only, and it really needs some kind of analysis like I've just mentioned to you, to be more widespread and more highly publicised in the newspapers. I'd like to see that kind of thing a little bit more. But in the meantime, that's all from me. We've got all those doctors on strike today. Good on them. 48 hours outside different MPs' offices, making some noise about the injustice, about the way in which they've been blown off by the spin, by the way in which this government does not listen to people and does not care about people and only wants to retain power, that takes credit where it's not due, that blames where it's absolutely the case that it's the government's responsibility to take ownership. So that's all I have to say today. Have a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you all again soon.
Welcome to G News, the good news.